welcome to the Happy Hour Money Podcast. My name is Josh Bennett. I'm here with my co-host Isaiah Douglas.
Good morning, Josh.
I'm going to try and think of a cute middle nickname for you, but it's too early.
Yeah, we'll try again next time.
Try again next time, yeah, exactly. Well, welcome to the show. We have hopefully what's going to be an interesting show, as always, for you. And we're going to talk, just because it's the holiday seasons and that time of year for New Year's resolutions, we're going to pose a couple ideas on things that you could think about for New Year's resolutions to give yourself in the money space. So, kicking us off, Isaiah, what's your big recommended New Year's resolution for people?
Yeah, I guess thinking through, from a financial perspective, we've touched on a lot of different topics. I think kind of tying spending with what you find valuable is obviously the biggest one, and just where does your money go? So what is the inflow, the outflow? Just taking a look at what happened in 2022. Don't necessarily beat yourself up about it, but understand where you did really well and maybe where you didn't. And from there, trying to optimize as much as possible. It's never going to be perfect, and that's okay. It's not any sort of demonization of spending money. I think spending money is totally fine. You should spend money on stuff that's important. But figuring out what it is that you really want to spend on. And I think the other thing that's come up in a lot of conversations recently is for people that are saving money that is non-retirement money, making sure that it's tied to something that they will be doing. So like, okay, I'm saving this money, it's not in a retirement account, it's here in the future, but like, what is it saving for? Like, why am I saving? Is it just random, or is it, I want to do a remodel in 3 to 5 years, or we want to take this really big vacation and we want to pay for other parts of the family to come, they just show up and we're going to cover the rest.
Yeah.
And I think that helps people be motivated to stick to that versus just having kind of this ambiguous, like, we're just going to save for something in the future. So that's come up in a number of conversations, is making sure the money has kind of a mission to it from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think the whole driver behind New Year's resolutions is you want to bring more value to your life in some way, shape, or form, whether it's value for your health or wealth or anything in between. And so making sure your money's actually going to things that you value or bringing happiness to your life, I think is super important. Whereas we all spend money on stuff that really doesn't bring that much happiness. And having a good idea of what fluff you can get rid of going into New Year's, I think is super powerful. What else? What other ideas you got? I got plenty that I can go on a tangent.
Yeah, go for it.
My big one, this is one I'm always a proponent of, sort of regardless of the situation, is if you have any ambition whatsoever to run a business or start a business, have a business, etc., New Year's resolution is always a good time to use that as a kick in the pants to get it started. I sort of believe that owning a business is the single best way to create wealth for yourself or your family. It's from a tax code perspective, there's really no better way to get tax incentives. Like, the United States government wants to facilitate growth. They want you to invest in businesses, so they give you a shit ton of incentives to do so. So I think anyone that has the means and desire should take care of that. And I think there's a huge opportunity, whether you're interested in starting one or just taking over one that's already in existence. I don't think there's ever been a better time. One, going into a recession, which whether we're going into one or still in the thick of it, that's up for debate, but that's typically one of the best times to either start or acquire a business if you're acquiring, because you can usually get a very good multiple for it and buy it for a lot cheaper than you would have 2 years ago. Whereas if you're trying to start one, it's also one of the best times to start, because one, you have to be creative, you have to start lean, and you have to do a bunch of things to really try to acquire a business. And if you're successful with that, it's just going to create a resilience that a lot of business owners don't normally get. Like, a bunch of very successful businesses were started in the financial crash. Like, you look at a lot of the startups that are kind of the unicorns now, well, they were started in the last major recession that we had. So I think anyone that's interested in doing that, give yourself a New Year's resolution to make it happen. And if you're thinking of starting one, aside from the recession piece, also these days you can start a business by just setting up a Fiverr profile with the skill set you have, and boom, you're in business. It doesn't have to be a massive investment of wealth and energy. Maybe just an hour or two here and there just to start getting your toe wet. I think now's the time. Now's as good a time as any if you can think about that.
Yeah, two things. I think the first thing is you talk about the different darlings that were kind of created out of the last great financial crisis. I think one thing that's going to change moving forward, and again, crystal ball is broken, it's in the shop, we don't necessarily know, is companies are actually going to have to be profitable in the future versus just burning money forever, because the idea of super cheap, low interest rates forever, no actual profitability of these tech companies, I think those days are going to be numbered and going to be very different as we move forward and kind of move out of this super mega debt cycle that we've been into. And so for doing a business and trying to say, hey, I'm going to go start something, if you're profitable, and it can be a very, what I would consider like a boring business that is really good cash flow, that's going to be way more attractive than the crappy tech company that makes no money ever. And that's one thing to think about. The other, I don't know if I would say for small businesses that the US government wants small business ownership and encourages it. I don't know if they actually really want that. I think they want mega corporations and big kind of influential companies to drive a lot of stuff. I don't think they really care too terribly much about Main Street or want small business to be successful. I would definitely disagree with that based on a lot of different things that are done, just from the additional rules, regs, other things. It puts up hurdles to small businesses because you have to spend so much time and energy a lot of times on complete BS that makes absolutely no difference to the end product. But is it better than becoming a W-2 employee for someone else? Yes, probably still is, but yeah, the government does not necessarily want to encourage you to do things that would make life certainly a lot harder than it needs to be.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you there, and we could go on a huge soapbox about that, but I mean, I do think, at least from a tax incentive standpoint, like, you know, just if you compare what you can get as, and I was actually having this conversation yesterday where, like, if you're a W-2 employee, there's really not much you can do other than owning a home to get good tax deductions, whereas, like, you own a business, a whole world of options opens to you. And I think that's what I mean by, like, sort of getting incentivized. Yeah, obviously, like, some of the regulations that are out there are ridiculous. Like, there's I forget the exact story, but in which city it is and state, but there's like regulations around becoming a barber where you have to have like 1,000 hours of like apprenticeship to become a barber. And I'm like, you know, as long as you don't cut somebody's scalp, you know.
You probably be in business if you do very much, right? Like, if you do a bad job, you're not going to
Yeah,
be in
if you stab someone with some scissors, you're not going to be in business and might be in jail. So, I mean, long story short, do we really need 1,000 hours of apprenticeship for a barber to start a business? Probably not. But that being said, there's a lot of businesses out there. And, like, I mean, I think, you know, whether you're a W-2 employee or a business owner, you have to answer to some master one way or another. Whereas, like, you know,
the 87,000 new IRS agents that are not going after people with tons of wealth. Those are going after small business owners to get the gotchas. So, yeah.
True. That's why you just be tax compliant and play within the rules of the game, which there's a lot of rules. Like,
the rules are there, but it is, hey, go make money and then tell us what you should pay. And then if you don't do it, we're going to give you penalties. And here's the rules, and we'll kind of interpret if you're right or wrong. Like, if you look at the way a lot of things are set up, it just doesn't, again, it's confusing, right? The idea was supposed to be tax laws changes that anyone can do it, and the idea is that it's so complex that you need to have help to structure things because it isn't simple. And so, like, if you really wanted to make and grow small businesses, you would make it simpler and make it very clear and easy to understand. And so, like, that's what I'm getting at more, is like they want to create more hurdles and more complexity when it doesn't necessarily need to be there if you would allow that to fix. And the other thing being healthcare, but we can get into that.
Healthcare is my biggest gripe, but yeah, I mean, actually, so Travis, one of our colleagues, and I were having this conversation around, you know, the tax, and so he works with me in our tax business, and you know, that was always been one of my positions where I think there would be a lot, you know, almost like to be worked out of a job is by having a simpler tax code. But one of the points he brought up, which I've always thought is fascinating, is actually taxes is one of the best ways to like instigate legislation, you know, more so than like throwing someone in jail and blah blah. Like, you just sort of tweak their incentives, which, you know, the more and more I get into tax code, the more and more I see the truth in that. But then that's where I sort of have this belief that, yeah, they do want to incentivize growth, but they, you know, also, it's the government, they want control over how you do it. But I think between the two masters, you have a lot more freedom working within the rules of the government in the tax code if you know, either work with a good tax professional or you know, take the time to learn the codes and what you can and can't do yourself. You have a lot more freedom and flexibility there than if you are a W-2 employee and you're just at the whim of your boss, which, you know, you could have a wonderful boss, which I've had plenty of wonderful bosses in my W-2 career, but you can also have some shitheads that can make your life absolutely miserable and can make you miserable for 5 years and then throw you to the curb as soon as they need a little cash flow in their belt. And so that's where I think, owning a business or starting a business can give you more flexibility and control despite the regulations and stuff that, could be hurdles depending on the business. It could be give you some pretty massive headaches depending on the industry. But I still think the freedom and stuff that offers is just over and over going to be better than, some of the restrictions of being a W-2 employee, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, agree and disagree with you at the same time, but that's part of why we have these conversations.
Absolutely.
This is at least we're not get into the Bitcoin Ethereum fight, which we can do that later.
There's no there really isn't.
But yeah, so what other we got way off topic with financial resolutions, but that's sort of our trend.
Yeah, I think just like the idea of business ownership gets glorified. It's not all rainbows and butterflies, and it's.
What do you mean? It's I only work 4 hours a week, and there's never been a stress ever, and I've never had to deal with SEC regulators or.
Yeah. So I just think, I think the idea of business ownership. Again, I wouldn't trade it for a W-2 job. So I think full disclaimer there, right? Like the goal is to be as unemployable as possible for as long as possible. But it does get glamorized where if you look at the stats of most small business owners in the United States, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, like the earnings are not like, oh my gosh, you make tons of money doing this. Like it is definitely skewed in one way, but there are opportunities, and sometimes those opportunities are just in areas that you would think would be a lot of money to be made. And I think that is the part where people want to do the next XYZ thing where it's like, hey, just the boring service-based business in a small community can do really well, and like go do those opportunities. I think that's where you try to encourage people to check things out. But
yeah, and I think one thing too with that is like these days, it doesn't necessarily have to be a business. Like I've had several clients and stuff that we've worked with that like if you have a skill set that you're doing for your current W-2 job, like I think it's worth looking into like could you do that as a freelancer, and like where you're not necessarily building a business per se, but you could just be giving yourself a job that you have more flexibility over. Like for example, one of our clients runs a sort of design company, actually a couple of them do, where they made the shift from W-2 employee to sort of freelancer, work with like 3 or 4 companies, and they're making probably, let's say, 100% to 200% more freelancer working the same hours, just because companies don't have to pay payroll tax to them, don't have to deal with a lot of the headaches of having an employee, so they'd rather hire them for 15 hours a week as opposed to hiring somebody else for 40 hours a week. Or like someone like us, like that has a small business, like we may need 20 hours of help and not want to pay full-time salary. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to do that sort of thing and just kind of replace your job and have another job that you just have a little bit more control over than actually starting a business with the glorified version of business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the other interesting tangents and things to think about for anyone that's wondering about, okay, where are the opportunities moving forward? So the idea of things got a lot cheaper because of globalization in that story. The idea that globalization has peaked and that you're seeing this kind of de-globalization and the idea of reshoring. So there's going to be areas and opportunities for entrepreneurs to take things and bring it back to the United States. All that happens though is still going to be, from an inflationary standpoint, the cost of living is still going to go up in that environment. But I think from a business perspective, having more of the things and resources that we need to run all kinds of industry, being more self-sufficient here in the United States, I think that is a big, like this is a big shift in like a lot of years that will go ahead. But that to me is an interesting area for business owners to think like, how do you create the business that is tangential to chip manufacturing coming back to the United States? Like what's the small business that you can have adjacent to the huge TSM facility in Arizona or in Texas or whatever? It's like, what can you do to help supplement that? Because I think there's going to be great businesses that can be set up next to some of those. So
I understand. Along the lines, we work with a bunch of e-commerce businesses that one of the big conversations is like, hey, we're struggling because shipping times and stuff from China, like where a lot of the products are coming from, or especially because of COVID, are like 8+ weeks to get product delivered. So like biggest struggle for a lot of e-commerce is like, hey, I have plenty of demand, I can't get any sales because I'm waiting on, and so it creates cash flow issues and all these headaches. Whereas one of the conversations we always have is like, okay, well, so can you get the inventory from closer, like United States, Mexico, Canada, somewhere along that lines? And I'm starting to see more pop-ups that are kind of catching on that trend of like, oh yeah, I can buy a 3D printer for $3,000 and do smaller scale manufacturing like you're seeing in China for pennies on the dollar in the US, and kind of like we're talking about onshoring that just via technology instead of the more traditional labor that like places like China are using. Which, so to your point, it's sort of like a really cool concept that's think that'd be a huge deal over the next 5-10 years. I know you were going to say, I interrupted you a minute ago. I know you were going to say some other resolutions.
Yeah, I just think other resolutions, I mean, a lot of times people will talk about, like, from a health perspective, wanting to do better as you move into the new year. And I think just trying to get to the idea of eating better and thinking about spending money tied to just high quality foods from that standpoint. So, hey, if you buy a deep freeze and fill it full of protein because you buy, half a cow or whatever, like, I think those are all great opportunities to spend money on things that matter. And also maybe it does actually lower the cost over the full year if you have that stuff there, where it makes it easier to limit the amount of intake of stuff that's processed and all the nasty stuff that goes along with that. So think about New Year's resolutions when people talk about, like, oh, I'm going to get healthy, I'm going to do this, and they're like, I'm going to join a gym. Like, that's part of the equation, right? Like, you need to also clean up the way that you consume and the food that you consume. And it's like, it's not an all or nothing. It's kind of, you can take it at steps and stages. And I think that is a huge one where, the real change starts on the dietary part, more so than on the working out part. Like, you can go for a walk and eat good and you'll be fine, right? Like, people way back in the day were just more active.
Yeah, we're not trying to be the Rock or anything, but
maybe you are.
Yeah, maybe you are.
I mean, I have the frame to build it, right? Like, look at me, come on.
Yeah, you can be the Hulk over there. Yeah, and I mean, that's actually something that's been kind of my personal financial resolution is, I even noticed this in my own life is like, through COVID, like a lot of us sort of, for lack of a better term, let myself go just with, the stress and having kids and all that fun stuff, which, it's a similar story for a lot of people listening. Like, life happened during COVID. It was a hard time. We stress ate, we drank, we did a lot of those things, and we didn't really eat healthy, work out. And, over the past year, I've noticed I've had to pay a lot more doctor's bills than I did in past years because of, like, issues with weight gain and things like that, which, there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that, hey, eating healthy and eating good real foods is super important, but especially with inflation on the rise, huge cost to that, which, is definitely worth factoring in. And there are ways to make it cheaper. Like, for example, like Isaiah was alluding to, getting some fresh meat. Well, there's a lot of farmers out there that have, kind of along the lines of supporting local businesses. There's mom and pop farmers that will have, like, you buy a cow from. Like, me and Isaiah split a cow about a year ago, and I still got the meat in my freezer. We use that all the time. It's been super great. But there's have a garden there, and Isaiah, you've gotten into canning and stuff. Like, it's an easy way to have a garden, get healthier foods throughout the year, despite where you are in the world and weather. There's lots of options. One, where you can build a whole new cool skill set, lower your costs. But yeah, it's definitely something you have to kind of think through. It's not just, hey, let me go to Whole Foods and spend a lot more money on the stuff,
Yeah, I would say, given an idea, so Beef Initiative, you can go and search for farmers there from a beef perspective if you're looking for something, so just beefinitiative.com. And then if you look in your local area, you can try to find something called Community Supported Agriculture, CSAs. So a lot of times there's those gardens and you can, like, get a share of whatever they grow. But yeah, I think those are great ways to look at it.
Yeah, and actually, CSAs are pretty cool. I don't know if you've done one, but we did one this first time this summer.
I'm gonna do one next year.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty cool because, like, you don't know what you're going to get until the week of. So it kind of forces you to get creative with cooking, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it definitely is. And then the other thing, which we should try to get a guest on to talk about this, but just the oils and stuff that you cook with, the idea of seed oils, I know it's come up a lot. They're poison, you should get away from them. There's lots of interesting research there. So just the idea of, like, when you cook with stuff and it's like heart healthy oil from vegetable oil, it's like, that's not, like, how do you get oil from a vegetable? And then you talk about, like, it's highly processed versus using, fats and things that are more natural from that standpoint when you cook things. And so if you're putting that stuff on everything, which it's in almost everything, if you look at vegetable oil, canola oil, soybean oil, all that stuff, you go to the store, you look at labels of stuff, like, it's everywhere.
I don't know if you've heard of ethanol, but that's literally corn oil.
Yeah, so it is, yeah. And so it's the idea of you need to make those changes too, and that will help because so many of those different things are linked to, inflammation, which leads to lots of other challenges as you continue to consume this all the time. And that wasn't the way, ancestrally, a lot of it would probably be our grandparents ate, and you've seen the big shift and change in just the body composition of the United States. You look at, like, obesity rates, all these other things, like, what do you track that back to? And a lot of it is processed foods, and a lot of it is then, tying into what is being used to cook a lot of these things. So, like, McDonald's, before early 90s, they used to take their fries and cook them in beef tallow, which is just beef fat, right? Not necessarily a bad thing to take potatoes and beef fat and eat that. That is okay. When you swap that out, all of a sudden it's in vegetable oil that then, once it's heated up and used, right? Like that oxidation is horrible for people. It's literally like just gunking up your arteries, and like that is a problem. And you've seen that change, right? So
right.
There is a crisis of, I think, easy, convenient ways to eat better. So right now you have to go out of your way to do it. But I think that is another kind of trend that's out there. So again, business owners, opportunities, if you enjoy that stuff, I think there's plenty of opportunities there too. So
100%.
I would just spend money on high quality food, both for yourself and your kids, and if you have kids.
That's definitely an investment that does pay massive dividends, whether you see them or not.
Back to healthcare costs, right?
Oh yeah.
You can lower your healthcare costs long term.
Yeah, healthcare costs are, as everyone knows, are going through the roof. And so, like, one easy way to save money, well, spend more money on good quality food. And actually, like, depending on how much you're eating out and stuff, like, you can buy super good quality food, cook at home, and still be ahead of most Americans who eat out a lot. Like, I mean, I don't know if kind of along the CSA lines are getting creative. Like, my wife found a place real quick, I think it was like out of Oklahoma or something, where she actually like orders every now and then and uses it for like special occasions, but like Wagyu steak, where, for $100 we can get a couple Wagyu steaks, which, I'll do like a little reverse sear and stuff at home. I'm not the best cook in the world, like I'm not bad, but I guarantee that steak is 10 times better than anything I've had at a steakhouse, outside of maybe, top in like, Las Vegas or something. But so you can still enjoy your food a lot more without having to go to a restaurant. Just you can buy good quality food and at least can be a mediocre cook, which, again, come along investments. And if you don't know how to cook, investing in a cooking class or something to get better at that, I think it's a good investment.
Yeah, that's also the other day where it's like people say they don't like to cook. It's like, well, do you like to eat? You should probably learn how to cook. It's like, that's just a BS excuse. If you say that, just smack yourself the next time you say it, because it's like you should learn, and it's a skill that will pay literal dividends, right? Like, you will eat better if you find things you can make and you can explore. And yeah, sometimes it's not going to work out, but yeah, give yourself the space and the time to get better ingredients, and maybe you'll see a big change. So
well, and actually, it's not that hard, man. Like, one of my old roommates, like, was one of the healthiest guys I know. And literally, like, he just meal prepped. Like, he was a super busy accountant and just meal prepped once a week. His meal prep was he basically just used a couple cookie sheets, throw like 10 chicken breasts on, then like a whole tray of veggies, and then just used those pre-made spice blends. And he just kind of changed up the spice blends, roasted his veggies, roasted his chicken, or baked chicken. And I mean, it's not the best meal in the world, but it's good, healthy, not something you're gonna get bored of or disappointed by eating every day. Like, it's just, you don't have to be a gourmet chef. Like, having just a minor skill set can go a long way too.
Yeah, some salt, some fat, and some citrus, and some spices, and you would be really surprised at the amount of stuff that you can create from that standpoint. So
it's the same. I think 90% of my cooking just involves garlic, paprika, and salt.
Garlic and butter is like the best smell in the world. But coming back to financial New Year's resolutions, right? So food, where you're spending money, how to think through those things. You had some other ideas, Josh. What other thoughts did you have from a financial lens?
Yeah, I think one of the other big ones is just really taking stock and making sure you've done sort of a financial house cleaning. I don't think you have to have necessarily any big ambitions, but I think the fact that we're in a recession, I think in 2023 financially is probably going to be very hard for a lot of people. And so I think doing some due diligence is, doing a reality check with your spouses, yourself, etc., of like, where are our blind spots, where are our gaps, whether it's insurance, like, hey, are we properly insured? Do we have an estate plan in place? Like, we've seen a lot of tragic scenarios over the past couple of years where people that didn't have estate plans in place. Now, these are not the pretty fun areas of the topic or the things that people want to think of for New Year's resolutions, but I would argue they're just as important, if not more important than most other New Year's resolutions, is really just making sure you're ready for whatever life could throw at you, and just kind of taking stock of where you're at, being very cutthroat and realistic, not kind of having the fluffed up version of your reality, but be very critical. And like, am I prepared for all the worst case scenarios? Like, whatever comes my way, like, we're good, than what we expect, and the bad, and everything in between. And I think just taking stock on that is something super important going into the new year, which I guess is a I guess the resolution there would be, hey, let's just get our financial house in order.
Yeah. There can't be a New Year's resolution list without talking about you need to buy Bitcoin, take self-custody, and continue to do that. So, I mean, it's just point blank. I'll say it till the cows come home, say it till I'm blue in the face. It's simple, but it seems to not be easy because people want to trade and do different things. You don't have to. You just go create value and you save into something that's just better money. It's freedom money that no one can control or censor and stop. And so if you've been paying attention and you haven't been living under a rock, you understand that things are not moving to the point where you're getting more and more freedom. And so this is an easy way to basically say, I want the ability to spend my money how I want and not have anyone tell me yes or no. That's it, right? And again, that should be something that we all strive for. And if and when federal governments decide to push out something called a central bank digital currency, we should all say, no, we don't want that. And I'm not one to get involved politically, but you should push back on anyone in your state or local level that is not something that we want. That will be a very dystopian nightmare that no one wants. So you don't want a Chinese social credit score type of system where you can't go do things because XYZ things happen. So regardless of what you think about the rationale and the why, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is just better money. So to me, I'll say it in 2023, I'll say it in 2024, I'll say it in 2025, I'll say it in 2026. You should be doing that, so it's just better to start now. Same way if you eat better.
Yeah, I will say, Isaiah did leave his tinfoil hat at home, but to give you some credence to what you're saying, I mean, this is we've both been, we give each other a hard time about just Bitcoin and versus some of the other cryptocurrencies and stuff out there, but what Isaiah's saying in terms of like the central bank digital currency, like, these are things that have been proposed, and especially in the UK, I know for sure, like we've been talking about essentially having control over what UK citizens buy, what they can spend money on. So kind of going back to beliefs with businesses and stuff, and having more flexibility and freedom over your life, and being able to spend on things you value. Yeah, I mean, we did see Bitcoin as an opportunity to really take control of your finances outside of the control of any central, not just the United States, but any central government, because I think time and time again we've proven that governments aren't always in your back corner, and so yeah, I mean, and there's like we go on a whole tangent around like really want to be sort of financially free, financially independent, and looking into second passports and all that fun stuff if you really wanted to go deep into it. But I think Bitcoin is a good way to at least take a step towards having more control over your money for sure. Just something that's outside of the normal systems.
And the nice thing is you don't have to agree with anyone else. Like the idea that Bitcoin is better money, it's money for friends and enemies. There can be people that you think are terrible people that should be able to use it just like you. That's the whole goal of good money, is that no one can stop that from happening. That is the whole goal. That's it. You should not be able to censor, stop, and reverse and change things, right? You should be able to go out and implement, if you have things that you need to do from a federal or government level, other ways versus them weaponizing money, because you may agree at a certain point that this group or this person or this country is a bad country, right? Most people just want to live their life, have food for their family, be left alone, right? They're not out there to get anyone else. Certainly there are bad people out there, but when the censorship happens to someone that you dislike, just remember it will happen to you as well. It's just going to maybe be a different point in time, and so if you don't want it to happen to you, you shouldn't want it to happen to anyone else. And I think for most people, they struggle to think about that, but when it happens to you, you'll all of a sudden have a very different view. And so being prepared and just saying like, hey, I want to start thinking through these type of scenarios. That's why I think it's a great New Year's resolution, is to dig in and maybe learn a little bit more. And I would tell you, educate yourself initially, understand kind of the why and how and some best practices, and then make the decision that's right for you, because it is obviously your money, your decisions. And we've always said that even in Vincere with clients, like, hey, we want to educate you and then you make the decisions on what makes the most sense. But yeah, if you're highlighting these certain things that you want to do, this is a tool for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that like me and Isaiah tend to be students of financial history and just history in general, which is also why we can tend to have some sort of pessimistic views around the current state of affairs. But I think anyone that's curious as to why is I have sort of pessimistic view on kind of the state of the world, and why I think having as much control over your destiny as possible is a super important thing. Like one book you could read that will give, I think, a lot of clarity into history is Ray Dalio's Principles for a Changing World Order. So for those of you who don't know, like Ray Dalio runs one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, and he's sort of kind of, now he's at the end of his career, like he's stepping back from Bridgewater and becoming more of an author, right, and sort of imparting a lot of his wisdom. But he created this book and studied basically 1,500 years of history and like the rise and falls of nations, rise and falls of currencies, what causes these things, political or otherwise, lifestyle habits, you name it. And it's fascinating. And just like, you don't realize like how quickly all these things change, and just like, our history is very short, but the world history is very long, and just kind of thinking through, where we at, or different cycles throughout the world and stuff, like things that happen in history can happen here and can happen to you. And, governments aren't always your friend, so you definitely want to have as much control over your destiny as possible within the rules of the game. But yeah, I definitely think becoming educated around world history, financial history, and things that could come. If you want just one book, I think that's the one to pick up and really learn about history, because it's fascinating. It's sort of a conglomeration of some of the top minds in history and finance in the world. So definitely worth reading.
Yep. His big thing is debt super cycles, and so we're kind of at the end of one of those debt super cycles. So the idea that the U.S. dollar could not be the currency of the world is mind-blowing to tons and tons of people, right? Like, that idea is just really hard. It's almost like telling a fish that they're in water and they're like, what? I don't understand. Like, they don't even get the idea that they're swimming in water. So, to give you a stat, there's 52 times that a country has had debt to GDP, so basically what they owe versus what they actually make, north of 130%. 51 out of 52 times there's been a default, which means they basically can't pay their bills and they go bankrupt. The one country that hasn't is Japan, and they're kind of circling the drain at the moment and having a lot of issues, and have had a stagnant economy for a long time. The U.S. is north of that figure, and when you look at the interest rate,
so there's two countries, us included.
Well, yeah, so we're in that environment right now, but like, just the interest rate on our debt is going to be one of the biggest line items in expenses as we move forward. When you look at the different entitlement spending, so whether it is social services, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, like all those different things, like, we spend more than what we create. And we're coming off of 2021 where we had the largest tax revenue ever, right? And I don't know how many people that you've looked at and talked to this year. Not a lot of people are making a lot of capital gains in 2022. Not a lot of people are making tons of money in the market. So we've increased our spending and we have less tax revenue. And then we're still gonna raise interest rates to curb inflation. So we're gonna put ourselves back into a recession, growing our debt, trying to pay that. This ends up being where the option is to make things more difficult or devalue the currency. And the Staples easy button there next to every politician is devalue the currency. And why would you devalue the currency? Because it's an easier decision, and it's not something you have to pass from a legislation standpoint. And so you want hard assets in that environment, and the best hard asset to own is Bitcoin. Gold is still something that's interesting. So for people that maybe think Bitcoin's crazy, own gold. Own something that is a hard asset that cannot be created out of thin air.
Yeah, no, I also add in kind of like, we're a big proponent of farmland and those things as well, which is not necessarily currency per se, but it is a hard asset that, obviously, food isn't kind of important.
It is. I think the one challenge with real estate is it's been bid up so high, and then you also have property taxes and other things that are outside of your control that the government can all of a sudden levy and say, hey, you know what, property taxes dramatically changed. This is now the new tax. If you don't like it, we'll just take your stuff, right? Like, if you don't pay it, they'll take your stuff. So I think having things that are outside of that is important. And Josh said, like, I left my tinfoil hat at home, right? So we'll just leave it at that. So just be aware.
Yeah, I mean, I think to summarize, I think being educated on world history and stuff and financial history could be a good resolution for the following year. And just really, the financial literacy in our country is just piss poor, and that's something we've constantly tried to fight against. And this part of why we started this podcast was to bring some financial literacy that's not just the Dave Ramsey garbage advice of the world, but some like real world financial advice. And so I think the best thing you can do for you and your family is be educated. Aside from like actual tactical stuff that we're talking about here, I think a financial resolution to read more books and be educated, I think is a really good thing. And you might come up with your own opinions on Bitcoin or farmland or any of the things that we're talking about. But man, it starts with being educated, and be critical about what you listen to, whether that's us or anybody else. Like, be critical about it. And don't just take things at face value and do the homework, do the research. I know we all get busy and have lives, but it's there's nothing more outside of family and things like that. Nothing that controls your future and your destiny, your family's future and destiny more than your economic freedom. So I think it's definitely worth it, dedicating the time to in 2020. What year were we going to? 2023? Okay. Can't even remember at this point. Yeah. Any other thoughts or parting wisdoms?
No, I've given all my wisdom. I'm done.
Yeah, you didn't get done for the day. All right. Well, I think I'm kind of spent too, so we'll table it there. But yeah, and along that lines, obviously we're coming into the new year, coming into the holiday season. So regardless of what holidays you celebrate and what you're doing over the holidays, we wish everybody a safe, wonderful, happy holidays with family, friends, and wish you all the love and happiness around this season. And hopefully it's the best one yet, and with many more years to come. Until next time, I don't know my glasses at this point, but
Cheers.
Cheers. Happy New Year, I guess.